years, the Minnesota Senate has gained experienced legislators who had previously served in the House of Representatives. Senator Erin Murphy had not only prior legislative experience, but also leadership experience. I had the opportunity to talk with her about her new Senate perspective. The breadth of your legislative experience is wide and deep. It isn't unusual for a member of the House to move to the Senate, but it is unusual for a member of the majority and a majority leader, no less, to move to the Senate and then be in a minority role. How have those experiences shaped your views on the legislative process?
It is so good to be with you today. And I have been thinking a lot here at the end of this session about that very question. And from my perspective, every office that we hold, whether in the majority or in the minority, has power. And we should use that power for its intended purpose for the people of Minnesota. So whether I am in a quote unquote leadership position or in the House or the Senate, I represent Minnesotans who have sent me here to do their work. And I'm going to use the power, every ounce of the power in the office that I hold on their behalf to fight for them. Leadership comes in many forms. There's a title that comes with majority leader. There's a title with the office of senator. And I'm going to use the power that I have, which is rooted in the people on their behalf. And so I continue to do their work.
So perhaps it isn't a fair question, but which body is better, the House or the Senate? Or at the very least, how are they different?
They are different, absolutely different. And more than the number of people, more than the color of the carpet. And COVID, I think, has really interrupted the ways in which I like to get to know people. So I want to come back to that in another year. But one thing I've been thinking a lot about are the rules of the Senate. And we have a rule in the House and in the Senate that we speak through either the Speaker or the President. But there's a rule in the Senate about keeping our eyes and our comments directed right to the President. And I have found that the inability to look at one another, to turn and look, to make eye contact with my fellow colleagues in the Minnesota Senate is a contributor from my perspective to the partisan differences that we're experiencing. And if we really want to represent well the interests of Minnesotans and to break down the barriers that are in our way, I think we'd be better off if we could make eye contact with one another from time to time while we're speaking on the floor. The human part of us, our ability to connect with one another, especially when we're talking about issues that are challenging, that are painful, that are separating us. I think we'd be better off if we were able to engage in human ways just a little bit more. So that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about in the Senate, and that rule that requires me to only look at the president while I'm speaking.
What are some of the important attributes of leadership in your view? And has it been a challenge for you to temper those abilities that you have as a member of the minority freshman class in the Senate?
So leadership really rests in who we are, right? Are we true to ourselves? Are we genuinely reflecting the interests of Minnesotans as they're sharing themselves with us? Are we willing to take a risk to stand up on their behalf? Are we willing to use the office and the risks to ourselves of making people angry or potentially losing a seat? Are we willing to take that kind of risk for Minnesotans? You know, you mentioned before that I was the majority leader, and I was, and I'm so proud of the work that we did together in 2013 and 2014. And we lost our majority in part because of the things that we did for Minnesota. We lost seats in greater Minnesota in part because of marriage equality. We engaged in a very, very vigorous agenda to balance the budget, and we did, and we raised taxes to do it. There were some things that we did that I think maybe cost our majority, and I lost that title, if you will, and that position as a result. I wouldn't change a thing. We should use every ounce of the power that we have, of the leadership we have for Minnesotans. And I think that is the measure of leadership that I am always looking for.
Minnesotans appear to value divided government. And as someone who has served in both the majority and the minority, is divided government working effectively for Minnesotans?
I think Minnesotans do value divided government, but we have made more progress in my tenure when we have had a unified government. I am always frustrated at this time of the year when we get hung up on the partisan political debates that aren't advancing our goals. For instance, today we're going to take up an amendment that is meant to limit the power of the executive branch over the use of those federal funds that are coming in. And as a legislature, it's our job to appropriate funds and set the budget. We should just do that rather than fighting over who has which power. That is an argument that I think gets lost on Minnesotans, but we spend an inordinate amount of time, and we have in this last year, talking about whose power should be checked. I believe in balanced government. I believe in a checked government where our power is checked, but I don't want to spend all my time talking about how to effectively check another branch of government. I want to spend my time working for Minnesotans, and today is an example where we're not doing that. So I do worry about the premise of divided government. I worry a lot about false bipartisanship and it getting in the way of actually making progress for the people of Minnesota.
You are the DFL lead of the Senate Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. During your years in the other body, you served on the Health and Human Services Committee, I assume because of your career in nursing. So what prompted you to tackle agriculture, and what have you learned thus far?
Over my tenure in the legislature, I've served on many committees: early childhood, health and human services, taxes, rules, legacy, and now ag. And I'm so proud to be the DFL lead on that committee. I care deeply about people and want to use the power of this office and the tools of our democratic institutions to improve their lives, including people who live in rural places. And especially having run statewide and served as a majority leader, which is a statewide office. I am very now familiar with the challenges that people face all across the state and have made commitments to them. And I know one of the places where I can advance those commitments and build the lives of the people of greater Minnesota by funding broadband, but making sure that people who are living in rural places have every opportunity, just like everybody else in every other part of the state. Part of my work is about solving those problems, and I'm really happy to do it from this perch.
Are there a few things, though, that surprised you, having not maybe dug in so deeply into agriculture before?
You know, every policy area that I have dug into has shown me over and over again the complexity of people's lives and the richness of people's lives. We are a beautiful mosaic across the state, and every part of the state, every region of the state is different, but that's what makes us Minnesota. And so this committee has once again shown me the complexity of life, the need for us to pay attention and listen to one another, and the value of having a legislature that represents every part of the state with powerful voices. Because those voices together, when we are actually listening to one another and doing our work, means that we're going to find solutions that work best for the people of Minnesota.
And finally, you are also a member of the Senate Redistricting Committee, which is off to a slow start this year, due at least in part to the census delays. How would you like to see redistricting proceed, and will the legislature, for the first time in decades, get this work done?
I sure hope that we get the work done for the people of Minnesota. My primary goal is to make sure that Minnesotans understand what's happening around redistricting and that they can bring their voices to bear on the process in the legislature. And if it goes to the courts, on the process set forth by the courts, because it's their power that's at stake in this process. So I want to make sure that Minnesotans are engaged, and I'm going to work to engage them so that in the end, the process, however it results, is representative of them, of our communities across the state, and so that we develop a fair map in a transparent way that allows Minnesotans to continue to use the power of their vote to build our future.
Senator Erin Murphy, it is always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. I look forward to our next conversation.